Hey guys, today we have Isobel Yeung on the show. Isobel is a senior correspondent for Vice, and her work revolves around reporting and creating documentaries on some of the most pressing global issues, such as world conflicts, terrorism, mass detention, genocide, you name it. And I was fascinated by her recent works around the Yemen civil war, around the machismo culture that is happening in Mexico, her work in Xinjiang, China, where they have over 1 million Uyghurs that have been kept in detainment camps. And overall, we just have a great time discussing her lifestyle as a correspondent by going into these countries and a lot of the pressing issues that are being underreported in the world today. So I hope you guys enjoy this conversation with Isobel and I. If you guys are listening to this on the podcast, would love it if you guys would subscribe for more episodes in the coming weeks. And if you guys are watching this on YouTube, would love it if you hit the thumbs up. That would help us spread the message out to more people and to get this episode seen by more people around the world. So thank you guys. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Isobel and I. Isobel Yeung, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I've been watching your Vice documentaries. Obviously, the thing that you're doing is going into these very oftentimes dangerous countries and cities, and you're interviewing these people live and really digging into their daily lives of how they're going about their day. And a lot of the times you're kind of in their faces. So with the things around coronavirus and this entire year that just took the world by the spiral, how have you been able to manage documenting stuff and creating new content?
Yeah, it's been hard. I think that I've traveled the least amount of time I have traveled maybe ever, but definitely in the last 10 years or so this year. And, trying to be creative in terms of figuring out other ways to document things and getting other sources to help you document information and digging into open source investigative techniques. And then also, have actually been able to sneak around a little bit and do a few international stories. I did one in Italy at the very beginning of the pandemic. I was in Mexico, been in the US quite a bit actually. But it's definitely been a challenge. It's been very, very strange this year.
Yeah, no kidding. I was in Mexico up until like March, and I think there was about 47 cases total then. And I just had a weird feeling of how bad it was going to be. Like AMLO, people that don't know, is the president, was going around giving rallies around how people should still continue to hug each other and why people should still like meet with their families and to love one another and to, it was such a bad sign. I just saw it going for a bad turn,
Yeah, it definitely didn't get any better. Mexico was one of the hardest hit in the Americas, and it's still, given that it's, a developing country and just doesn't have the infrastructure or the resources or the ability to just stop things. People are still desperate to go out to work. The scenario just got worse and worse, and it's been incredibly difficult for a lot of people there.
Yeah. When did you go down there to Mexico?
I was there in, I want to say July, but that might be wrong. That sounds about right.
It's all kind of iffy.
I know this year there's no such thing as time. Everything is just in a vacuum of its own doom. I was there in the summer at some point, and I was doing a story on. Around the world, domestic violence has sadly increased this year in a lot of different countries. We saw it first off in China. We saw it in other parts of Asia. We've seen it in the US. We've certainly seen it in the UK. And Mexico was also a place where, we've already got this issue of really rampant gender violence, which was only worsened since COVID, and people have been locked down in their homes, and you're battling against your spouses, and things have just got incredibly tense. And so in a country where femicide, which is where a woman is killed because she's a woman, are already incredibly high, and gender violence and domestic violence is already really high, we've seen those numbers just skyrocket this year. So I was over there doing a story on that.
Yeah, I was actually there when there was this big protest that was happening, and this was back in February, I think. So it was this rise of movement, and there was like fires being like, people were just, it was crazy, because I think a woman did get killed, and there is this like machismo culture that's been ingrained into the Mexican culture. I imagine that's what you were there and reporting and talking to some of the people down there. Like, what were some of the things that you discovered?
Yeah, there's definitely the machismo culture is real. I spoke to one of the guys that was had been locked up for choking and smothering his wife, and he was just kind of like, well, this is just what we do. This is how it is. So I mean, that is one thing, and culturally that's very difficult to obviously break. But then another thing is, there are other places where there is this machismo culture, and you can break it because you don't let them get away with it. Like, it's as simple as that. And the problem is there is so much impunity going on in these sorts of cases. I think it's less than 5% of killers in Mexico get convicted of those crimes. And so you really need to implement a system where people know they're not going to get away with it. We spoke to someone who claimed to be a hitman, a killer for hire. And he was saying that he does not worry I mean, we weren't able to verify his story, I should say, but he was saying that, if we're to believe him, that he doesn't have to worry at all about being imprisoned or being punished in any way for the crimes that he alleges to commit, because he knows that he can just bribe the police and he can bribe his way out of any sticky situation. So, there's a lot to say for the systems themselves and the government institutions. And also this year, disturbingly, the government has cut funding to institutions that help with gender inequality and women's rights and gender violence, just because of the incredible pressures on the economy.
Right. So this was something that was actually in one of your documentaries. You went up to a press conference where you confronted AMLO directly, and it didn't seem like he had much of an answer for you. I mean, it almost seems like he just was in denial completely. And this is relatively recent. So, I mean, what were the things that you were trying to, for people that don't know, what were you trying to things that you were trying to confront him about? And was there any results from what happened in the press conference?
No, well, I mean, yeah, you're right. Firstly, he really did not want to talk to me. It's funny because I actually came 2 days in a row. You have to get up super early to get to these press conferences, but he does do a presidential conference every morning. And so I went one morning. I was there at 5 a.m., got a good seat, was like there just shoving my hands in the air every second, and he was not catching my eye, and questionably avoiding me. And then I went the second day, and the same thing happened, and he was literally just walking out, and he was like, "Okay, thank you, we'll see you all tomorrow." And I just stood up and started shouting my questions, which it was a moment of desperation, because I really did feel like a lot of the time I think that journalists who are heading in there to try and hold people accountable are shut down and often targeted, frankly, in those press conferences. And obviously I have an advantage because I'm coming from out of the country. I'm not based in Mexico. And so I felt like, there was an opportunity for me, and there was a lot of people who wanted me to ask those questions that I'd been speaking to. I mean, a couple of days before, I visited a family in Mexico State where A bunch of different family members, I think five different females, women and young girls had been murdered. The killers had got away. It was very, very little, if any, progress in the case itself. And you know, people want to know, like, what is the government doing about it, and is this even a concern? And disturbingly, AMLO, the president, was not very forthcoming. I mean, first he sort of tried to overlook it and ignore it and said that, you know, there's never been a better time to be a woman in Mexico, which was sort of mocked in the press that day. And and then, you know, went on to say that they were working on it and sort of made very vague gratitudes about what they were doing, but nothing really solid. And also denied that they'd cut the budgets, which was worrying because I mean, it just wasn't true. They had cut the budgets, and it actually later on reversed some of the cut of some of the budgets since that press conference. So yeah, it was a confusing message, and I don't think there was much clarity. But I do think it was important to bring it up with kind of the highest echelons of the government.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't think people in the U.S. as much can relate to the culture if they haven't experienced like the machismo culture there in Mexico. This is a short rally from the story, but I was dating a girl in Mexico City, and her uncle happened to be part of the cartel, at least formerly was. And she was introduced to her ex-boyfriend by her uncle, who was also part of the cartel. And this is like 5, 6 years ago, which is why I'm able to tell it. And I'm not in Mexico. But one day he...
That helps.
Yeah, well, I'm makeup back. So anyway, so one day he actually ended up bringing a gun to her house all the way from Guadalajara, and came with their friends, and basically said that if she doesn't get back with him, he'll shoot her. It was just like a very hard, cold like look at like
Mm. No, it's interesting. It's a real problem. It's yeah, sadly there seems to be less and less resources to attempt to address it. I don't know. I mean, yeah, I think I mean, I'm a bit of a mongrel, so I don't think people really know. A lot of people speak to me in Spanish and assume that I'm Mexican, or I don't know. Um, yeah, I don't know. I seem to be able to. I seem to be able to fit in quite a lot of places, and I think like Latin America is somewhere I can sort of fit in without standing out too much. Yeah, you must get that too. Well, you look more Asian than I do, but yeah, yeah, yeah. Mm, but it's rude. Mm. Mm, yeah, that's interesting. Mhm. Sure. So there's a Muslim minority group in China called the Uyghurs. There's about 12, 13 million of them, and they live in the northwest corner of China called in a region called Xinjiang. And that borders a lot of Central Asia. And the Chinese government, in an attempt to assimilate them, essentially, has embarked on this mission to re-educate them, and the way they've done that is to crack down on them and to lock up over 1 million Uyghur Muslims into so-called re-education camps, which the US government has called concentration camps. Inside there, they are, taught Chinese laws. They are taught Mandarin, the Chinese language. They are taken away from their family members. They are taught, they're often prevented from practicing their religion. They are, assimilated in a lot of different ways. There's allegations of various different physical torture as well as some cases of sexual torture inside these camps. So they really are an incredibly brutal way to crack down on an entire population. Yeah, over 1 million people. Um, so the Chinese government would say that they are doing it because there is a security threat, a valid security threat from these Uyghurs. And over the last 10 years, I mean, there's been a handful of small level attacks. Well, there has been a handful of attacks, some of which have come from Uyghur individuals, which has kind of acted as a catalyst and an excuse, frankly, to crack down on them. I mean, I would say that the level of the crackdown, which has just been so vast and so insanely huge, has massively outweighed the any potential security threat that they can say that they fear. And I think in reality, it is an attempt to, the Chinese Communist Party is fearful of any otherness, and what they're trying to do is create a homogenous society which is completely obedient to and loyal to the Chinese Communist Party. Well, I mean, it's complex, but there was firstly the war against terror from the US and from the West. Since 9/11, there has been kind of a global acceptance that there is kind of a crackdown on, frankly, Muslims. And so that was one of the catalysts from the Chinese Communist Party. And then another was, there, as I said, there have been this handful of attacks. So there was one in Kunming. I think it was in, actually, I don't even want to hazard a guess. There was one in 2009. There's one in 2014. There was also one in Beijing, and there's been a couple in Xinjiang itself, which have been blamed on Uyghur separatists, a group that they call the East Turkestan ETAM, uh, the East Turkestan militant group, that they are blaming these attacks on, and they're saying that this warrants the level of the crackdown. Yeah, the Xinjiang itself is the strictest surveillance state in the world right now. It's, there's when I went there, there's just security cameras everywhere. There are, people are checking your phones to check that you don't, with this malware, to check that you haven't visited any foreign websites. There are face scanners everywhere. There's iris scanners. There's voice detection. There are literal, people within the communities that are kind of paid to keep check on you. They're kind of government informants. So firstly, it's very, there's eyes and ears everywhere, essentially. And then, they are forced, they're taken away from their families, often in the middle of the night, we're told. And they're brought to these detention centers, which are these huge, sprawling camps. We first found out about them because several researchers were looking at satellite imagery, because obviously the Chinese government is very secretive about their actions in that region. So we found like hundreds of these camps just popping up over a matter of months and years, and they continue to be built at the moment. And these are very high level security prisons. Essentially, we've seen government documents that were leaked where we can see that these are treated essentially as like very high level security. So there's layers and layers of different security. There's the solitary confinement, as well as put into group cells. You're not allowed phones. You're not allowed contact with the outside world. You're completely, you're treated as a prisoner. Yeah, so I went to, I went as a tourist. So, we went undercover into Xinjiang, and it is a very strict security state, and so it's difficult to effectively cover the region because journalists are obviously not welcome there unless they're on kind of an official dog and pony show around these camps where you see these very happy singing Uyghur people inside. And other than that, the Chinese government is extremely secretive about the region, so they don't want you there. So, when we went to Hotan, which is in Xinjiang, we were followed consistently, and I think that's just because any foreigner is followed, and so it's kind of a constant battle to try and figure out how we can shake our government minders loose, and how we can effectively report on the region without putting anyone's lives at risk, frankly, because it's we know that people are watching our every move. Was she Uyghur? Was she Uyghur or Han Chinese? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It depends who you talk to. I've spoken to a number of Han Chinese, but it's all kind of anecdotal, and it's difficult to know what people really think because there's not necessarily a huge amount of transparency when it comes to interacting with people in the region. I think that for the majority, I would say, of the Han Chinese people that I spoke to, I think that they they see a lot of the propaganda, which is an extremely effective tool in China, and you see that they're told and fed this information the whole time that there is a very real security threat. And so for a lot of the people, and I spoke to a lot of tourists who are visiting the area, they felt like the constant presence of police and the crackdown on the area was really good for China, and it meant that they were now safe to visit these places. The Chinese government was doing a good job in terms of assimilating them, that this is a backwards region with backwards people, and that the training programs, etc., are a way to advance the economy and to bring China into a very lucrative and prosperous future. So this was all part of a lot of people do back the Chinese Communist Party. I also did meet some Han Chinese people who privately told me that they were worried about the extent of what was happening. Firstly, for that, they see the economic impact of having over 1 million people put into camps, and that has been severe on some business individuals. And also that, a lot of some Han Chinese people told me that they were worried and that they felt it was incredibly unfair, that so many Uyghur individuals, which were living side by side with Han Chinese people, so many of them had to go away and be imprisoned and have this incredibly harsh life, for something as simple as wearing a headscarf or having a beard or reading a Quran or praying. These are very, very basic things that these people are getting locked up for. So I think for some people there is, especially for people who had pre-existing relationships with Uyghur individuals, there is a degree of sympathy for them. Mm. Yeah, yeah, it really can be anything. And on top of that, they collect all this data. I've seen some of the databases that they collect, which is incredibly detailed information on each Uyghur individual. So they know kind of where they live, obviously, who their family members are. So if you're related to someone who has been abroad, maybe to Saudi or to Turkey or to any of the risk countries, then you yourself could be at risk of being imprisoned. If you have prayed before or if you visited a mosque before, all these events are recorded. Your every interaction is recorded, and so you really can be. There's so much risk. You really can be put away for anything, and there's so much fear of that happening because people have families that they want to look after. For so many reasons, obviously, you don't want to end up in a camp. It depends. I've seen documents that suggest that they're there for a year and then their behavior and progress is assessed, and then they go into a few months of vocational training. Um, and I also know of individuals that have spent years there. So it depends, but it's definitely, and there's also different levels of camps. So some people go to kind of camps that aren't as high level, and sometimes they are allowed in and out to go to work, and sometimes they're allowed to have family members visit them, but for the most part it's a long-term endeavor to retrain, and literally brainwash is one of the terms that they use, of these individuals that they're sending there. Yeah, actually, some of the younger men, especially, are considered higher risk, because they might be more likely to partake in extremist activities. So yeah, it depends. But yeah, I think that from what I understand, there's also um, their progress is constantly monitored, and if they kind of pass these various tests and show complete obedience and their behavior is in line with the Chinese Communist Party, then they might be released. But I would say that also when they're released, they have people keeping an eye on them at all times. We've also seen accounts of Chinese Communist Party cadres going to live with Uyghur families to really keep an extremely close eye on them. If people, there's reports of if Uyghur individuals refuse to eat pork, then that is reported back to the local government authorities, and that's seen as a flag, which could end you back up in the camp. Yeah, yeah, we've definitely, yeah, we've heard of. I mean, I've spoken to individuals who told me that they were forced to eat pork and to drink alcohol. Mm. Hmm. Yeah, we were able to. I mean, I'm in contact with a lot of Uyghur individuals who live outside of China at the moment. So there's quite a lot in Turkey. There's also some in Kazakhstan, or a few in Kazakhstan. There's a few scattered around Europe and a few in America. Um, so yeah, I mean, I was able to talk to quite a lot of them. The individuals who'd spent time inside the camps, I mean, they all testified to incredibly harsh conditions that sounded really, really traumatic. Some of the women told me about being forced to take pills that they didn't know what they were. They didn't know if they were birth control. They didn't know if they were sedation, but they claimed to have been forced to have taken pills. Um, there was hours and hours of reciting the same Chinese Communist Party laws and songs. A lot of them knew the same songs and the same kind of doctrine that they were all given. There's a song that essentially goes, "Without the Chinese Communist Party, there is no new China." Um, I can't remember the rest of the lyrics, but it's not the Chinese anthem. Although there was also one person told me that they were also asked to recite the Chinese anthem. Um, yeah, and just like hours and hours of kind of sitting and listening to lectures on how great the Communist Party is and how loyal they must be, and denouncing extremism and denouncing terrorism, etc., etc. Um, so yeah, I mean, a lot of people told me of how terrible the food was, how they were physically abused by guards who were there. Some of them told me they were asked to return to communities and spy on their neighbors and on their communities themselves, which I think is one of the harshest practices because, obviously it's tearing the weaker communities up themselves. So yeah, it sounds like, I mean, just story after story of like really devastating, really, really harsh conditions. And then for the family members who, almost every Uyghur person I speak to who lives outside of China has family members that they believe are inside the camps. I mean, if you go to, I was at a Uyghur restaurant the other day in Boston, and I was talking to the family there, and they, the owner has her father inside a camp, and her brother and other family members that she just hasn't heard of, who she assumes might have been inside the camps, and or who just don't know, because the other thing is you're not really allowed to be, or you're not allowed to be in contact with people outside of the country, because otherwise it's it's very risky, because that is a sign of questionable activities, which could end you up in a camp. So, I mean, just the way that it is kind of tearing apart of the fabric of families and Uyghur culture is just really, really devastating. Yeah. In Uyghur restaurants, I mean, the Uyghur food is great. I actually love Uyghur food. There's a lot of there's like Xinjiang ramen, which is like the pulled noodles, like the homemade pulled noodles with they serve that. Actually, someone there told me it was the original spaghetti bolognese until Marco Polo brought it back to Italy and introduced it there. But they, I haven't fact checked that. But yeah, it's really delicious. They use a lot of tomatoes and mutton or lamb and onions. It's really good. They also have these roasted buns, which are they use a lot of mutton, so they have like roasted buns with mutton inside. Um, what else? Um, a lot of cow rolled, so like roasted like kebabs. They're really delicious. Mm. Yes. I mean, I first went there about 12 years ago as a tourist, just to see what it was like. And I was really struck at how Central Asian it felt. It really felt very similar to going a lot across to a lot of the Central Asian countries. Um, they have a different language, they have a different culture, often a different religion. Um, so yeah, and now, I mean, there has been a real effort over the last decade or so for the Chinese government to, provide incentives to move Han Chinese people to the region. So there's a lot of marriages between the Uyghurs and the Han Chinese, and there's also a lot of forced assimilation, frankly. So yeah, you're seeing a lot more kind of where it was kind of 80% Uyghurs, now kind of 50-50, and those gaps getting smaller and smaller, which is I'm guessing the goal from the beginning. Um, I mean, firstly, I lived in China for 4 years. I love China. I have strong familial ties there, and I lived there for a while, and I have great friends there. And I think that there's incredible things that the country has done, and I'm still eagerly watching it, and I would love to go back. We'll see. um, yeah. No, no, we can move on. I read his book the other day. It was great. Yeah, yeah. That's great. No, I use Insight Timer, which I quite like. Yeah, it's another meditation app. It's good. Yeah. Mm. Yeah, I mean, I really appreciated Dan's book because I felt like he was very honest. And I think that, a lot of uh, war correspondents or people who cover conflict are not so honest about that feeling of adrenaline being one of the driving factors for doing this work, frankly. Um, and there's definitely an element of that. I think that often I've got better at it recently, but certainly for the last, 6, 7 years that I've been doing this work, I think that often I would come back from these places and be really just frankly pretty unpleasant to be around, uh, for my family, for my friends, for my boyfriend. Um, you know, there's just an angstiness that is very difficult to explain, but it's kind of, I think it comes from a place of, yeah, just seeing like being driven by that adrenaline all the time and the excitement all the time. And like, and also, you do feel like you're delivering a service and you feel like the work is really important and it's important to get these stories and to speak to these people at the heart of these like extremely difficult and intense moments. Um, and and then you come back and you go to a dinner party and people are talking about Kim Kardashian, and it's really difficult to get on board with that. And it's also difficult to like, even engage in a conversation. I remember like going to my friend's house once when I come back from an assignment, and they were talking about what they'd done that weekend. And I'd just been to Yemen and watched young babies die in front of me, and it's not something you can drop into casual conversation. And you also don't want to be that person that was like, oh, when I was in Yemen. You just, it's it's a tough balance, yeah. But then there's also this drive inside, there's this desire inside you to want to talk about it because you need to process it in some way. So I mean, I've got a therapist, and I've got a lot better at kind of leaning on her to talk about these things. And um, I mean, I was diagnosed with PTSD, and I think that like a lot of a lot of that kind of long term impact comes from just not really knowing how to process it in the moment, because you kind of, at the moment, you're in it, and you're getting the story and it's so important, etc., etc., and so you're not really processing any of it. And then when you come back, you just have to fit in back into normal life. And so I think it's basically really important to switch off sometimes and take a step back and figure out how to process it and who it is that you can lean on to talk about these things with. I don't know if that answers your question. Sorry. Hmm. Yeah, I'm still figuring that out. It's definitely a challenge. I think that I, for one, have finally realized also that it's not necessarily, you don't have to go to a dangerous place in order to make a good story. I think that I've got a better balance of, I only want to go and do the stories that really matter and that I feel like I can really deliver something new on and important on and relevant. I think I used to sometimes go to places just because I could and because it was exciting and because my bosses were asking me to. And now I think like I really think about the story and I really make sure that I can deliver something interesting and exciting and do it justice. Um, and then I when I am off, I actually take time off now, which is I think important. I mean, it's been harder this year. Yeah, I'm a workaholic, and I really struggle sometimes to take time off, which is part of the reason I moved to the UK because I feel like now my brother lives 10 minutes away, my sister lives 10 minutes away. I live with my boyfriend. It's really it for once I feel like I have a bit of a base and a bit of a bit more grounded. Um, and I've lived in I lived, I graduated and then moved to China and then I moved to the US and I've lived all over. And so I feel like when I was coming back from those trips, it wasn't necessarily coming home. It was just kind of coming to a base to like refuel so that I can get out the door again. And I think that now I've got a little bit better at having some work-life balance. Although my boyfriend would probably disagree with that, but yeah, yeah, it's definitely shit to be in a relationship with someone who does this work. Yeah, yeah, mm, yeah, yeah, yeah. That's true. I mean, yeah, it's just obviously this kind of work obviously pushes that to the limits because you're away all the time, and you're often in places where you can't talk, or and you're seeing very intense things, and then it's difficult. Yeah. Mm. I mean, I had a very sort of grounded. childhood, I grew up in southern England. My dad was kind of a lot of the time was working in China, so we'd go back and forth there every year. But I was so desperate to get out, which I think is partly what drove me to do this work. I was very curious about the world. I found life in southern England so boring, and I just wanted to travel. I don't I just wanted to travel, and I just wanted to get out and see the world. And I knew there was so much more out there. So I think if anything, yeah, when my mum traveled a lot as a kid. So I think that what she wanted was to feel grounded and to like make sure her kids had a grounded childhood, and she did and delivered so well on that. But then, as a result, it just made me itching to get out there. Sure. um, so Aleppo was in a yeah, that's a long one. I guess I'll just um, I'll just summarize by saying it's in a very strategically important place for the Syrian government as well as for the rebels who are fighting to hold on to it. And it was a an important battleground that was fought over for a long time. And I visited there in 20 I want to say 2016, 20 I think 2016. I was able to go into government held Syria, government held Syria, and traveled around a bit to Latakia, to Homs, to which had just been taken back by the government, to Damascus and to Aleppo, which was still being fought over. And we went to the government held area of Aleppo, and they were still fighting the rebels who were kind of lost it soon after we left. So, and it was a really important win for the regime because President Assad has sworn since the Arab Spring, which is almost a decade ago now, to take back every inch of the country. And so this was a really, really important win for President Assad. Um, it depends who you talk to. There's a lot of the majority of Syria has been taken back by the government. There's still Idlib, the area of Idlib province, which is kind of along near the border of Turkey, is still under the control of a rebel faction, HTS, which is kind of a mishmash of different groups and people, and a lot of the civilians have also been pushed into that kind of corner. But most of the rest of the country has been taken back. Yeah. Yeah, I would say that's true for a lot of people. I mean, it's kind of what we were talking about with China. It's hard to know in a really authoritarian country because people aren't, there's this incredible acquiescence from the population for people who are living in government held areas, but then you don't know to what extent people are telling the truth about how they feel, or just, it's way too risky for them to tell you their personal truth, or to share any criticism of the government, because it's a very unforgiving government. And we've seen thousands of people disappeared. We've seen thousands of people locked up in these sprawling prisons. We've seen thousands of people killed and executed, separated from their families. So yeah, and that was one of the reasons that we wanted to go into government held Syria, is to try and figure out where that balance lies and where people's loyalties really lie, and whether people really believe the propaganda machine that is operating so effectively there, or whether people are just keeping their heads down and keeping quiet. And I don't know the answers necessarily. I think it depends. Yeah, I wish it was edited because it was like the world's most, no, but it wasn't. It was like the world's most awkward silence. And also the other thing was it was live TV, so I had their producer in my ear, uh, telling me to move on and to stop asking questions myself. Um, so yeah, it was, yeah, it was pretty awkward. But I guess what it showed was, what it showed was that, and I had a talk with the one of the TV hosts afterwards, and it really showed that these people were incredibly loyal to the government, and that they did believe that the Assad's government was fighting terrorists who wanted to take over their country, and that the work that they were doing was to spread Assad's message, which was a positive one, that they were going to get the country back in shape and to take it back and take control, etc. And they did not believe or think at all that the images that we'd seen and that we know are true of civilians being attacked with chemical weapons were real at all. They thought that it was entirely terrorists that the government was fighting. Both. I Yeah, I spoke to, well, when we're talking about the TV host in particular, like one of the guys I spoke to, I spent some considerable time with him actually, because I was just really wanted to know where his head was at. And I spoke to him on camera, I spoke to him off camera, in private and in public, and his message is always the same, which is that he completely believed and was aligned with the Syrian government and the Syrian regime, and that his work was to help spread that positive message. No, thank you very much. It's weirdly kind of therapeutic to talk about it as well, actually. Definitely. Thank you very much. Um, yeah, I don't know how much I should talk about it, but I mean, there's a few projects that I'm excited about. I mean, firstly, frankly, I'm excited that, you know, with this new administration coming in, I'm hoping that there'll be less obsessiveness from US media over Trump's every tweets. And, you know, I think in general, but especially over the last few years, we've seen a real inward lookingness from the US media and understandably, because it's just been such an insanity roller coaster. So I think that hopefully, you know, people will start to care about what goes on outside of US borders again. And I think that, you know, if this year especially has proven anything, it's that we are more interconnected than we know, and that what happens on the other side of the world in a place like, I don't know, China, does really impact what happens on our home turf. And so I think that we really need to pay attention to that and not kind of willfully close our eyes to these events. So having said that, I mean, you know, I obviously care about China, and the US-China relationship is extremely interesting at the moment, to see where that goes. We don't have true clarity over that with the Biden administration. So that's something that I'll be following, and I'll be following kind of, you know, China's global expansion and how that shapes up. And yeah, there's a few other things, but I'm kind of developing and working on them at the moment and trying to figure out where they go. Thank you. Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Sean. Nice to meet you. Take care.